There's something you write on in a very categorical way. You say the scientific facts are in complete harmony with the universal design intuition. As as someone who may be watching this, who's a non-expert, they don't know the technicalities. They may say, "Well, I find that a bit hard to believe because we have all these experts. Like for the commoner, the experts are, Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and others. And they would say, well, Doug, they don't seem to agree. They don't believe it's in harmony. What would you respond to that?
Yeah, and that's a very good observation. And I devoted a chunk of the book. Well, let me back up and say, in my own kind of career work, I started off. I call it. What do I call it? I think I call it the utopian view of science or something like that. This idea that scientists are, yes, they're people with all the quirks that humans have, but they put those quirks aside when they go into the laboratory. And when they go in the laboratory, they're after the truth. And they do experiments, if they're experimentalists, to try to understand what the truth is. And if those experiments force them to recognize that their thinking was wrong, then they recognize it and they move forward kind of in this steady progression, closer and closer approach to the truth. And I recognized the more I worked as a scientist and worked with scientists and looked at how results can challenge ideas, that's not that's not how humans operate. Humans don't just believe things to be true, they want things to be true. They don't just hold things to be true, they sometimes dearly hold things to be true. So as persons, we get attached to what we think is true, and we kind of construct something very significant, namely our lives and how we go about doing things around the things that we take to be true. Given that, it's not going to be the case that if you challenge something that's at the root of how someone sees himself or herself and all of reality, they're not going to say, oh, okay, I guess I have to change my view of reality. We just don't operate that way. We become invested in our view of reality, which means even if there is a whole line of research that's showing something foundational that you believe is probably false, you're going to push back against it. And you'll push back against it personally, because that's how humans operate, but you'll also socially, to the degree that you can, construct a culture that pushes back against it. And that's what you have in the scientific community. The scientific community consists of humans. Humans are political. Humans build culture. Humans use culture to exert influence. And that means the scientific community is a culture that at times is going to harm science. It's going to push against something that, if we were all thinking as pure scientists, we would say, no, you shouldn't push back against this. This should be allowed to go forward, and we should test to see which is true. But if you don't want it to go forward because you don't want that to be true and you want this to be true, then you use all the power you can use, all the power you can muster within your community to prevent that idea from going forward. And that sounds very ugly. And I think people who aren't scientists encounter that idea with disbelief sometimes. But really, if you step back and think, what are humans? Is there any group of humans where there's power and prestige and fame and money at stake that doesn't get political? I can't think of a single example. So why would science be the one place where it doesn't get ugly at times? It's not. It does get ugly at times. So if you take that into account, it is perfectly possible for the people in the positions of power in the scientific academy to be very carefully and deliberately pushing forward an idea that the science actually says is false. And that sounds very shocking at first, but when you think about it and look at specific examples, it should have been obvious all along.